If you watch cable news, you probably recognize this guy. He's Tony Perkins, president of one of the most extreme anti-gay organizations in the country, the Family Research Council.
Homosexual men are more likely to abuse children than straight men. Homosexuality poses a risk to children.
Perkins has called pedophilia a homosexual problem, believes gay men recruit children, and has compared gay activists to terrorists.
Tony Perkins really stands out as unique in the truly hateful and vile language that he uses about LGBT people. Perkins has consistently and repeatedly accused gay men of molesting children. He's compared LGBT advocates to terrorists. You know, the list of sort of heinous things that he said just go on and on.
In 2010, FRC was labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, a civil rights organization that specializes in tracking domestic hate groups.
We've listed the Family Research Council as a hate group for several years now because the organization engages in the demonizing of the gay community. Basically, they tell lies that, for example, gay men molest at higher rates, are pedophiles, and so on.
Despite FRC's extremism, Perkins has become a fixture in both right-wing and mainstream media, often speaking on behalf of Christian voters and giving credibility as a conservative policy expert.
Tony Perkins is really a fringe political figure, an extremist who masquerades as a representative of Christian voters. And he's been successful in that because so many reporters and politicians have accepted this bogus presentation.
I think Perkins, presents himself as a pretty put-together guy. He was in politics in Louisiana for a long time. He has connections to a lot of mainstream organizations.
He's articulate, he's kind of slick, he's got his talking points down and polished, and he's been doing this for a long time.
The media's willingness to take Perkins seriously has helped make him a superstar in conservative circles. It's also helped him bring FRC's dangerous anti-LGBT politics to a national audience.
Perkins, as I say, uses the mantle of Christian faith in a way that's very dangerous, especially to faith communities, to LGBT young people who've been raised in the church. And so to see on national media outlets this person spouting hateful language about them and using the language of Jesus Christ to do so is really, really deeply dangerous.
The problem with putting a hate group leader on mainstream television is that immediately gives that person credibility. People who may not know much about Tony Perkins, don't know much about the Family Research Council, see someone like that pop up in mainstream venues, and their assumption is that is a credible source.
When Perkins advocates for ex-gay therapy or says that gay men are trying to molest and recruit children, these are not views that should be part of the sort of dominant political mainstream. They're not views that any significant number of Americans share, and yet by being on the media, it helps with his fundraising, it helps with his ability to get politicians to speak to Family Research Council events.
One of those events is FRC's annual Values Voter Summit, which has become a must-attend event for rising Republican politicians. The event regularly draws GOP presidential hopefuls and prompts a wave of uncritical mainstream media coverage.
The Values Voter Summit is the Family Research Council's annual conference here in Washington, D.C. They invite a number of politicians, almost exclusively Republican politicians, every year. This year it will be particularly noteworthy because a number of Republican presidential candidates are going to be there.
FRC's co-sponsor in this event is an organization called the American Family Association, whose bigotry is unbelievably even worse than that coming out of FRC.
The chief perpetrators of hate crimes in our culture today are homosexual activists.
But while mainstream media outlets regularly cover the Values Voter Summit, they almost never mention FRC or AFA's extremism, letting Republican politicians attend the event with impunity.
I think the real story that hasn't been told in hardly any of the mainstream political coverage is really why is it that these sort of mainstream political leaders, members of Congress, governors, and so forth, think it's appropriate to appear before an organization that uses such consistently vile language about LGBT people.
What I'd like the media to tell people is the Values Voter Summit is being hosted by two hate groups, and the sad fact is that we have several presidential candidates and other public figures who are going to go to this event and end up sanctioning beliefs that are so far outside the mainstream and so painful to the populations being targeted. It's quite astounding that this is even happening.
The media's unwillingness to properly identify Perkins as a hate group leader is a major problem, giving him and his group the credibility they need to continue being influential in right-wing political circles.
This guy is the head of an organization that has regularly demonized and lied about the gay community in particular, about Muslims in other situations. It's not biased to identify him as a hate group leader. When you identify Tony Perkins as running a hate group, you're just telling the truth.
This past April, CBS's Bob Schieffer became one of the few media personalities to properly identify Perkins as a hate group leader, demonstrating what standard practice should be for interviewing groups like FRC.
The Southern Poverty Law Center has branded the Family Research Council an anti-gay hate group.
Certainly, Tony Perkins doesn't like it when he's identified that way. Certainly, he and his organization react poorly to journalists who treat him that way. But that shouldn't be a reason for journalists to, not be honest with their viewers.
If media outlets insist on continuing to give Perkins a national platform, they should at least give their audiences the information they need to decide whether they should take his comments seriously.
If people were better informed about what FRC has said in the past about various populations, the demonizing that's been going on, the propaganda, they'd be much less likely to be snowed by anything that comes out of Perkins's mouth or comes out of the FRC.
If your coverage somehow requires having someone that hateful on air, don't you owe it to your viewers to tell them who they're seeing?